Every student trying his or her luck in science has heard of Boyle's law. Robert Boyle is regarded as the first modern chemist. He was a leading figure of 17th century intelligentsia, a time that was shrouded in foolish, oppressive, superstitious thoughts, weird, outlandish, so-called logics, a time people lived in the terror of self-appointed witch-finders. Robert Boyle was born with a silver spoon in his mouth in one of the wealthiest aristocratic families in 1627 as the seventh son and the 14th child of his parents' 15 children. At the age of 8, he was sent to England's most prestigious private school, Eton College, but being unable to fit in with the educational discipline there, he discontinued and was tutored privately. At the age of 12, Boyle embarked on a lengthy tour of Europe as a part of his education. He studied French, Latin, Italian. Mathematical lessons left an indelible imprint on him. The 14-year-old Boyle went to Florence of Italy in 1642, where he heard of a 77-year-old man put under house arrest by the Roman Catholic Church for his heliocentric utterances that allegedly went against the Holy Scripture of the Catholics. His name was Galileo Galilei, whose work was banned in Italy as being profane, and he died soon after. Boyle, a Protestant, was rattled, shaken and dismayed by the turn of events and felt deep sympathy for Galileo. He began carefully studying Galileo's work, presumably smuggled in from Switzerland. Gradually, he became a strong supporter of Galileo's philosophy and started to believe that mathematics is the language of the world. Back home, Boyle suffered a serious illness that permanently affected his eyesight, and for the rest of his life he could read only very slowly and had to employ people to do his writing for him. Throughout his life, Boyle was sickly and suffered from recurring illness, but nothing could overshadow his interest for science, and in 1655, when he was 27 years of age, Boyle received an invitation from John Wilkins, head of a college at the University of Oxford. He moved to the university town of Oxford, England, rented rooms there and set up a laboratory. He had the good fortune to meet Robert Hooke, a young university student whom he employed as his laboratory assistant. In 1654, vacuum pump was invented by Otto van Guericke, and Hooke's made improvements in its design. Using Hooke's pump, Boyle and Hooke's carried out experiments to investigate the properties of air and noticed that at a fixed temperature, pressure multiplied by volume is always a constant. In other words, when you increase the pressure on a gas, its volume shrinks in a predictable way. So this was the famous Boyle's law, the first gas law to be discovered in 1662, and we had to wait over 100 years before the next gas law, namely the Charles law, was discovered in 1787. published his result, and with this publication he proved that air follows mathematical laws, upholding his belief that nature can be explained by mathematical laws, a thought he derived from Galileo. Robert Boyle put chemistry on a firm scientific footing, transforming it from a field bogged down in alchemy and mysticism into one based on measurement. He defined elements, compounds, and mixtures, and coined a new term, chemical analysis, introduced many standard chemical tests, including the litmus test. Boyle took 28-liter glass jar, fit with a bell inside, rang it with the help of a magnet outside the jar. As he pumped air out of the jar, the sound of the bell grew fainter and fainter, demonstrating that sound cannot travel through vacuum. Furthermore, as everything in the jar remained perfectly visible, it showed that light can travel through vacuum. Using a candle, Boyle showed that vacuum will not support combustion and that flame requires air. In 1660, together with 11 others, Boyle founded the Royal Society in London, the motto of which was Nullius in verba, meaning that take nobody's word for it, as the society dedicated itself to learning nature's secrets by experiments and not to rely solely on theoretical speculation or statement of philosophers. An immensely wealthy Robert Boyle never officially joined any university, but spent open-handedly for his laboratory, lived a relatively frugal, simple life, and was a very generous man. Boyle was the first prominent scientist to perform controlled experiments in a period of time when even the idea of an experiment was controversial, and the established method of discovering something was to argue it out. And secondly, Boyle deviated from the tradition of secrecy and published his works giving the details of procedure, apparatus, and observations. He was the first person to define what is meant by a good experimental science and emphasized upon the need of documentation, repeating, modifying an experiment to improve it further. He taught never to abhor or lose heart if an experiment is unsuccessful, never to fight shy of another attempt. Like many budding scientists of his time, Robert Boyle tried his hand at alchemy, making futile attempts to discover the philosopher's stone, supposed to have the ability to transform base metals to the precious gold metal. He put on immense effort to discover what was called the elixir of life, that was thought to cure all diseases and to grant eternal youth, but he was unsuccessful. Boyle started to publish from the year 1659 and continued to do so for the rest of his life on subjects as diverse as philosophy, medicine, and religion. The Sceptical Chemist was published in 1661, which is regarded as the cornerstone book in the field of chemistry. General History of Air, written by Boyle, was published in 1692, while the Christian Virtuoso was published in 1690. He left his papers to the Royal Society, and these lectures are now known as Boyle's Lectures. Robert Boyle was a devout and pious Anglican Christian who keenly championed his faith, sponsored educational and missionary activities, and held the view that science and religion are mutually supportive. In 1668, Robert Boyle, at the age of 41, left Oxford and moved permanently to London, living with his elder sister Katherine, elder to him by 11 years, in her house for the rest of his life, to be precise for 23 years. And here too, that is in his sister's house, he set up a well-equipped laboratory, employed assistants, allowed and received visitors, and published at least one book each year on the average. Most importantly, he shared all his scientific pursuits with his elder sister Katherine, who was a distinguished and eminent lady. Boyle was, however, not a very social person, and he never married. Robert Boyle died in 1691 at the age of 64, after a short illness exacerbated by his grief over Catherine's death a week earlier. Boyle's contribution to experimental science is shining as beautifully as ever in all of our hearts and minds. Let us bow down in awe and humility to this great man of science.